I said I do to a man I respected but did not love, and I said it with a steady voice and dry eyes and a bouquet of white peonies in my hands, while 200 people smiled at me from white-draped chairs. And somewhere across the city, in an apartment I had a key to but had promised myself I would never use again, the man I actually loved was probably sitting alone, knowing exactly what I was doing and exactly why I had chosen not to choose him. I went through that entire wedding day, the vows, the first dance, the cake, the photographs, carrying that truth like a stone in my chest. Be honest, would you have made the same choice? Before you answer that, I want you to understand what it feels like to be 24 years old, financially terrified, emotionally exhausted, and convinced that love alone is a luxury you cannot afford. I'm not asking for absolution. I'm asking for understanding. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and stay with me, because what happened after that wedding day is the part of this story that I have never fully told anyone until now. His name was Gareth, my husband. He was 31 when we met, I was 23, and from the very first conversation there was something solid and anchoring about him that I had never experienced before. Not exciting, I want to be precise about that. Not thrilling, not the kind of person who made your heart race, but steady, dependable. The kind of man who showed up on time, paid his bills without drama, remembered what you said 3 weeks ago, and acted on it quietly without making a show of it. I had grown up without that kind of steadiness. My father left when I was 9. My mother worked 2 jobs and loved us fiercely, but was always one unexpected bill away from a crisis. I watched her spend my entire childhood on the edge of a cliff, financially and emotionally, and I absorbed that precariousness into my bones. By the time I was an adult, security wasn't just something I wanted. It was something I needed the way other people need oxygen. It had become the primary lens through which I evaluated everything, including people. Gareth was a senior project manager at a firm that had been stable for 30 years. He owned his apartment outright. He had a pension and a savings account and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from never having had to panic about money. And he was kind to me. Genuinely, consistently kind. He paid attention, he was thoughtful, he treated my opinions like they mattered. Did I love him? I cared for him deeply. I admired him. I felt safe with him in a way I had never felt safe with anyone. Whether that constitutes love, I have turned that question over in my hands for years, and I still don't have a clean answer. What I know is this. When Gareth proposed after 8 months of dating, my first feeling was not joy. It was relief. And I recognized even in that moment that relief and joy are not the same thing. But I said yes. I said yes because I was 23 and scared, and because I told myself that the warmth I felt for him would grow into something deeper over time. I had read that love could be built slowly, brick by brick, through commitment and shared life. I believed that, or I needed to believe it. I should tell you about Adam now, because this story cannot be told without him, and I've been circling him the way you circle something that still has heat. Adam and I had been in each other's lives since we were 19. We met in the first week of university, the kind of collision that feels like the universe being deliberately clumsy. Same seminar, same row, argued over the same point in a discussion about a book neither of us had fully read, laughed about it afterward over terrible campus coffee. That was us. That was always us, an argument that became a laugh that became everything. We were together for 2 years in university. Not perfectly. We were young and neither of us fully knew how to be in a relationship, and there were fights and misunderstandings and a particular 6-week period where we weren't speaking that I would rather forget. But what we had underneath all of that was a connection I have never been able to replicate with anyone else before or since. He understood the architecture of how I thought. He could finish my sentences in a way that felt less like a trick and more like evidence of something rare. We broke up at 21 when his family relocated, and the distance and the uncertainty of being young and unestablished made everything feel impossible. It wasn't a dramatic ending. It was a slow, sad, practical uncoupling that left both of us grieving something we hadn't fully finished with. We stayed in loose contact, a text here and there, a like on a post, the kind of digital proximity that modern life enables and that I'm not sure is always healthy. There was never a clean goodbye. There was just this persistent, quiet presence at the edge of my life. WH. And I met Gareth at 23. Adam was living in another city, building a career in something he loved, but that paid almost nothing. He was brilliant and creative and passionately alive in all the ways that made me love him. And he was broke, renting a room with 2 other people, figuring it out in the way that idealistic 20-somethings figure it out. He was not, in any practical sense, someone I could build the stable life I desperately needed with. Not yet. Maybe not ever, I told myself. That was the word I clung to. Maybe. I started dating Gareth while still texting Adam occasionally. That part I am not proud of. Not romantically, not explicitly, but the texts had an intimacy to them, a history and a depth, that I should have stepped back from the moment Gareth and I became serious. I didn't. I told myself it was just friendship. I told myself that often enough that I almost believed it. The first real line I crossed was 6 months into my relationship with Gareth, 8 months before the wedding. Adam was visiting the city for a week for a work project, and we agreed to meet for dinner. Just dinner, just catching up. I didn't tell Gareth. I told myself it wasn't worth mentioning. I told myself it would only create unnecessary worry when there was nothing to worry about. But I got dressed for that dinner with a care that I wasn't putting into getting dressed for dates with my own boyfriend, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I registered that fact and filed it somewhere I didn't want to look. Dinner was 3 hours. 3 hours of the kind of conversation that makes you feel awake in a way you had forgotten you could feel. At the end of the night, standing outside the restaurant in the cold, Adam looked at me and said, "I miss you, Lena, not in a casual way. I genuinely miss you." And I said, "I miss you too," because I did, because I had never stopped. He hugged me goodbye, and I walked to my car and sat inside it for 15 minutes before I could drive. I went home to Gareth, who had made dinner and was waiting up, and I told him I'd had a nice evening with an old friend, and he said, "Good. You should do that more. You don't take enough time for yourself." And his kindness, in that moment, felt like a punishment I had no right to complain about. Gareth proposed 4 months later. A quiet evening, no grand spectacle, just the 2 of us at home, a ring he had chosen carefully, a question asked with such sincere vulnerability that it made my chest ache. And I said yes. I said yes, and I meant the yes, and I also knew, in some chamber of my heart I kept padlocked, that I was saying yes to the wrong person. I told Adam by text. I don't know what I expected from him. What I got was a long silence, and then, "Is this what you actually want?" And I typed back, "It's what I need." There was another silence, and then, "Those aren't the same thing, Lena." I didn't respond. I put my phone face down on the nightstand, and I left it there, and I told myself that chapter was closed. It was not closed. 3 weeks before the wedding, Adam called me. Late, past 11. I stepped outside onto the balcony so Gareth wouldn't hear, and I stood in the night air and I picked up. "I can't not say this," he said. "I've been trying to respect your decision, and I can't do it without saying this first. I'm still in love with you. I have been this whole time. And I know the timing is terrible, and I know this isn't fair, but I needed you to know before you." "Adam," I said, "I'm not asking you to blow everything up. I'm not asking you to choose me over a life you've built. I just need to know that you know, that you're not going into this without knowing." I stood on that balcony for a long time without saying anything. The city hummed below me. Inside, Gareth was probably asleep, trusting and peaceful, the way he always was. "I know," I finally said. "I've always known." "Then why?" And I said the truest thing I said in that entire period of my life. Because love has never been enough to make me feel safe, and I don't know how to change that. He didn't say anything for a while. Then softly, "I would have tried." "I know," I said. "That's almost the hardest part." We said goodbye. I went inside. I got into bed next to Gareth, and I lay there in the dark, and I let myself grieve the choice I was making, fully, for about 20 minutes. And then I put it away. I sealed it into the part of me I didn't visit. And 3 weeks later, I stood at an altar in white peonies, and I said I do. The first year of marriage was not unhappy. That is the honest truth, and I think it complicates the story in ways that are important. Gareth was a good husband, present, affectionate, genuinely invested in our life together. We built a routine, bought furniture, argued about small things, and laughed about them later. There were evenings that were warm and comfortable, and I told myself that warmth was enough, that it was what I had chosen, and I would honor that choice. But Adam did not disappear. He had moved back to the same city by then, and we had mutual friends, and the universe seemed disinterested in making distance easy for us. We would encounter each other at gatherings and navigate those encounters with careful politeness. Too careful, the kind of careful that anyone paying attention would recognize as restraint rather than indifference. The second line I crossed came 14 months into the marriage. We were both at a mutual friend's birthday, and Gareth hadn't come because of a work obligation. Adam and I ended up in the same conversation for most of the evening, and when the party thinned out, we stood on the back porch and talked for an hour the way we always talked, and at some point he said, "Are you happy, Lena? Really?" And I said with no hesitation, "No, not the way I thought I'd be." It was the first time I had said it out loud to anyone, and the relief of saying it was immediately followed by the weight of what saying it meant. Nothing physical happened that night, but I drove home knowing I had handed him something real, something I had been withholding from my husband. Over the following months, we began meeting privately. I told Gareth they were group outings. They were not group outings. They were the two of us in small, quiet places, having the kind of conversations I was starving for, conversations about meaning and feeling and the interior of a life, the things that Gareth, for all his goodness, had never been able to give me. He was a practical man. He loved practically. And some part of me needed more than that, and had always needed more than that, and had simply hoped it wasn't true. One evening in November of that year, we were sitting in his car outside a coffee shop, long after the coffee had gone cold, and Adam said, "I need you to make a decision. I can't keep being in this half space with you. It's not fair to me and it's not fair to Gareth." "I know," I said. "Do you love him?" The word sat there between us. I thought about Gareth at home, loyal and trusting, building a future brick by brick with someone who was sitting in another man's car at 10 o'clock at night. "I love who he is," I said carefully. "I love what he offers, but I'm not in love with him. I don't think I ever was." "Then what are you doing?" Adam asked, not angrily, just honestly. "I'm scared," I said. "I have always been scared." "I know," he said. "But Lena, you can't spend your whole life choosing fear." The discovery happened not through a phone or a confrontation, but through a letter. A handwritten letter, which sounds almost anachronistic now, but Adam had always communicated best in writing. He had written me something, not a love letter exactly, more of an honest account of where he stood and what he felt and what he needed from me. He had left it in a jacket pocket, intending to give it to me. I had borrowed that jacket on a cold evening and forgotten to return it. The letter was inside when Gareth found it while looking for spare change. He didn't confront me that night. He waited, and that waiting was its own kind of devastation. He sat on that knowledge for 2 days, and then he came to me at breakfast and placed the letter on the table between us and said, with a composure that must have cost him enormously, "How long?" I told him, not everything at once and not easily, but I told him the truth. About Adam, about the feelings I had carried into our marriage, about the meetings, about the conversation on the balcony 3 weeks before our wedding. That last part, the balcony call, was what broke him. Not the meetings, not the emotional affair. The fact that I had known on the morning of our wedding that my heart was somewhere else, and I had walked down the aisle anyway. "You let me believe this was real," he said, very quiet, measured in the way of someone holding themselves together through sheer discipline. "It was real," I said. "My care for you was always real. My respect for you was always real. But not your love." I couldn't answer that. My silence was the answer. He asked me to leave. He was generous. Even in that moment, he didn't take the financial security that I had feared losing so much for so long. The settlement was fair. The separation was civil. Gareth, even in the process of being devastated, was a decent man. That decency made the guilt heavier, not lighter. The secondary blow came from a direction I hadn't anticipated. My mother, when she found out the full circumstances, did not comfort me. She sat across from me in her kitchen and said, I spent your entire childhood trying to show you that you could survive without a safety net, that we would be okay. And somehow you grew up believing you couldn't. She wasn't angry. She was heartbroken. She felt responsible. And watching her carry that responsibility for something that was entirely my own decision was perhaps the most painful cons. Equince of all. Adam and I did not end up together, which I think surprises people when they hear this story. We tried for a few months, after everything had settled. But the foundation of what we had was built on absence and longing, and when the absence was removed, what was left was two people who loved each other but had grown into very different versions of themselves over the years in between. We ended, mutually, gently, and with a grief that was different from any grief I had ever felt, the grief of something that was real and right and still simply didn't work. I am 28 now. I live alone in an apartment that I pay for with a job I worked hard to get, and the financial ground beneath my feet is steadier than it has ever been, not because of someone else, but because of me. That took longer to build than I expected. It also healed something in me that no relationship could have healed, which I understand now but didn't understand then. What I want to leave you with is this. I made the choices I made because I was afraid, and I disguised that fear as practicality, and I let it cost two good men something they deserved better than. Fear is not a reason. It is barely even an explanation. It is something you have to look at directly and decide you are not willing to let drive anymore. If you are in a relationship right now that you chose for safety rather than love, I am not telling you to burn it down. I am telling you to be honest. With yourself first, and then with the person sitting across from you. They deserve that honesty more than they deserve the version of you that is simply enduring. And you deserve more than a life spent managing fear instead of actually living. I learned that. I just learned it by doing everything wrong first. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. And if it made you think of someone who needs to hear it, share it. I'll see you in the next one.